In the book Atheism, There is No God, written by Gora, we are learning about the chapter The Age of the Prophets in the last episode. In continuation of this episode, today, although the religions of the prophets were theistic traditions, they moved forward further than the older religion. There is a difference in the theistic qualities of these two. The beliefs in the soul and the other world did not undergo much change, but they were made much clearer. Heaven and hell and soul were described in accordance with those beliefs. But there was an important change in the idea of God. Buddhism started out as a reformation of the Hindu religion. Since God was already thought to be attributeless in the Hindu tradition, the conception of God was abundant in Buddhism and social emphasis was placed on social morality. That was not the case with Christianity and Islam. In Palestine and Arabia, from where they emerged, people in ancient times used to believe in many gods and worship stones and natural forces. In these two religions, when prophets intend to reform those religions, the concept of God was well defined. There are two essential differences between the ancient age gods and gods of the age of the prophets. In the ancient age, people believed in many gods: the sun, the moon, the wind, rain, harvest, sickness, health, war, and the fine arts. Various gods presiding over all these were worshipped. People designated forms for these gods, created icons, and built temples. The change that the prophets introduced into the idea of God was to establish a single God in place of many gods. They imagined a single God to be the creator. This God had no form. It was thought to be the personification of love or benevolence. The places of worship where the followers of these religions gathered and worshipped the formless God became temples. There were no images in these places, no rituals of worship and no sacrifices. Only prayer remained. The Christian of those times, however, regarded the prophet as the Son of God and set up his image in temples. Thus, to think that there is only one formless God is the first change, and that occurred in this religion. The second change was regarding the qualities of this God. In the ancient age, gods were seen as punishing autocrats. People used to perform the worship and their rituals such as sacrifices to pacify the anger of these gods. The gods of the prophets were not like that. Qualities of love and benevolence were attributed to this God. God was imagined to be not as a punishing ruler, but as a loving father and guide to righteousness. So instead of fear, the followers of the new religion acquired the qualities of affection and courage. Because qualities such as love were also attributed to this God, only a way of addressing God remains in these new religions. Instead of begging for forgiveness for the sins committed and entreated to remove hardships, prayers changed into conversations in which people related their joys and sorrows. Thus, as soon as there came about a change in the idea of God, which was the foundation of theism, a change also occurred in the modes of living in the followers of the older as well as new religions. With this, people's conduct changed as well. The most important change occurred in people's social outlook. This was better than before. People now loved one another and followed social morality, formed into large societies. As new ideas developed, the old religious differences diminished and people assembled together as larger and larger societies. As there was the same God for all the followers of this religion, their way of life became one and people formed into a large society. As the construction of the society improved, we know that morality too became more widespread. The strength of the society had increased. With that increase, unity, effort, and social happiness also increased, and all the individuals became increasingly happy. Their previous hardships were removed. Thus, because these gods helped form a new point of view and especially helped social construction, the followers of the religion had greater reverence for and trust in these gods. Because this God has been of use in social reconstruction, it became possible for people to think that this God was true in other circumstances as well. So, they incorporated this God also in the true arts necessary for living. As knowledge of logic improved among people, the connection between the idea of God and the life of man became closer. People believed that man was created by God and man's life is inspired by God. They believed that a single God was the author of the whole creation. As the reverence and trust in God increased, people did not verify the idea that God was the creator. It remained a mere belief. Since it was held with a great deal of belief, and since people thought that everything was the creation of God, the knowledge those men had of natural forces remained merely a matter of faith devoid of proof. Although in ancient times there was a fear of God, the connection between human life and faith in God was not as logical and strong as it was in the age of the prophets. The idea that God was the creator did not come in their way of understanding the forces of nature in a verifiable manner. They were worshipping God on the one hand, and on the other, they were making the needed human effort. As a consequence of that, in the ancient countries of Greece, Egypt, Arabia, India, and China, mathematics, logic, astronomy, and medicine, and to some extent physical science developed extensively. The scientific discoveries that started in those times have also been contributing to modern science. But in the age of the prophets, as there was an abundance of knowledge of logic and social restrictions, and as the belief that God was the creator became established, people had neither the courage nor the interest to prove scientifically the causes of natural forces in terms of other physical forces. As a consequence, the quest for truth in that age was based on the faith and that the universe as a creation and not based on verifiable scientific knowledge. In the age of the prophets, the stronger society became the further the quest for research and verifiable truth declined. In those times, works of law, ethics, social construction, and theistic doctrines did flourish, but the physical sciences had not yet taken root. Even the physical sciences that flourished in the ancient age had now been banished, they were condemned and suppressed. In the age of the prophets, the strength of society increased and people's happiness improved. Belief in the religions of the prophets grew. Every fine art was about either gods or the prophets or other religious matters. Stories and works of poetry were written about religions. Sculpture and painting were developed. Many festivities gained currency in the name of the religions. Thus, in the age of the prophets, the scientific outlet declined and society and art flourished. That is why, consonant with the social outlook, many huge universities were built in that age. Physical science was not taught in them. Only logic, art, ethics, and theology were taught. To serve the society, people, inns, and medical clinics were built. As the social outlook became stronger among people, political systems also flourished. In the ancient age, only the fittest one is tribe became the chief. Tribes fought with one another in mutual hostility. In the age of the prophet, political systems became quite stable. Kingship was passed on from generation to generation through heredity. As people adopted a social outlook, they submitted themselves willingly to the rule of the kings. The customs of the ancient age, however, did not yet go away. People still believed that the king was of divine origin. As God was the personification of love and as the ritual of worship was most quietly dispensable, the need for priests diminished to a large extent. The ideas of God, soul, and other world, however, have still remained in some fashion or other in these religions. None among these ideas is verifiable. The common man did not have either the interest or opportunity to understand their meaning. Yet, because he had faith in them, he could not relinquish them. So, there arose a need in society for some people to explain the theistic ideas in religions. Men were also needed to assemble people in places of worship and conduct prayers. Those who thus propagated theistic ideas based on such needs connected themselves with places of worship and formed the priestly class. The priests in the ancient age used spells and the incantations extensively. People in the stage believed in magic and witchcraft. Magic requires secrecy. Using these secrets, priests used to exploit people. When the prophets changed the idea of God into an idea of someone who was like a father, then secrecy was needed in the relationship between the people and this new God. Instead of spells and incantations, prayers now contained praises full of love. As anyone can go straight to his father, followers of these religions set aside the priest who recited spells and incantations and started praying directly. In regard to the sequence of duties to be carried out by the priests, this is the difference between ancient religion and the religion of the prophets. Furthermore, social construction had been progressing well. The responsibility of executing social construction and preaching the morals needed for it fell on these new priests. The reason for this is the social morality was tied up with faith in God. The burden of defining such a faith in God lay on the priests. So, the priests of this age of the prophets relinquished spells and incantations and started preaching morals. Thus, Manuals of spells and incantations were gone, and in their place came ethics, repeating spells were gone, and moral discourses took its place. The priests became preachers. In the religious texts, in place of spells and incantations, social duties were spelled out. Books like Jan Avesta, Dharmapada, the Bible, and the Quran were such. The morals that were necessary for social construction of those times were clarified in these books. The teachings of the prophets were contained in these books. To some extent, the duties pertaining to human life were explained in them. These moral duties became popular as principles. In practice, they became social customs. Subsequently, they were codified in the form of books. These books became the basic texts of those religions. In order that people could have extensive faith in them, they were published as authorless or as revealed by God through the prophets. People who had faith in God continued to believe in whatever was written in those books. Gradually, people came to have blind faith in every word that was contained in them. The followers of the respective religions would not be willing to criticize the contents of those books or change them on the basis of changing times and places. When social circumstances changed after some time, the books remained the same and formed the old customs which would hinder progress. Because people had gained faith in theism, and because in those days the priests had an intimate relationship with theism, people had great respect of these books. Gradually, priests were able to turn people over to their side. They even gained the audacity to defy the kings. As they had an intimate relationship with the theist ideas, they knew the falseness in them. Nevertheless, as their respectability was based on the propagation of those ideas, they suppressed their bogus quality and emphasized theism ever more. People become selfish and deceiving. Society does not condone deceit. So, the religious teachers wasted their talents and abilities to cover up their deceit, misleading people with their sophistry and established blind beliefs. Gradually, just as in the ancient religions, there appeared in these religions religious teachers who reinforced deception and immorality. With that came unhappiness. After the age of the prophets, people once again were unhappy. Theistic ideas in these religions were the cause of this. Since human life does not tolerate unhappiness and immorality, people revolted against the religions of the prophets. However, society was more extended and regulated by the end of the age of the prophets than in the ancient age. Political affairs were conducted more systematically. As colleges had been established, people had developed interest in science like logic. As there was much social strength, there were facilities for traders and travel, and due to frequent intermingling, people were beginning to have broad-minded ideas. Wherever tools to develop human civilization exist, they were propagating in other countries also. Instruments such as writing tools became widespread in many countries. Human intellect and literature increased enormously on the average. So, this time, the revolt that occurred against immorality and unhappiness occurred in the general population and not in isolated prophets as before. The most courageous person who stepped forward among them was considered a social reformer, but he was not worshipped as the old prophets were. Due to improved social construction and development of science, there was not as much difference between these reformers and their followers as there was between the prophets of the old and their followers. Shankara, Ramanuja, Luther, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, and Dayananda were social reformers of this sort. They courageously struggled hard to remove the unhappiness of their contemporary fellow men. The changes which these farmers brought about led the way to the modern age. We'll meet in the next episode. Thank you.
For more videos, please subscribe to this channel Positive Atheism and activate the bell icon.